He knows the feeling that life demands more from you, that the trials are heavier, that cycles take longer to turn, that the ground others seem to find easily. Taurus needs to dig, support, and sometimes rebuild with their own hands. And for a long time, the answer the world gives for this is too simple. It's because you're strong. You can handle it, as if the ability to endure were a sufficient justification for the weight, as if the fact that you haven't broken yet were a complete explanation. But that answer never truly satisfies, does it? Because deep down, in the quietest moments, when the ordeal is happening and there's no one around to witness it, a question arises that is more honest than any consolation. Why? Not, why can I endure it? But why this? Why this volume? Why this frequency? Why, when it seems the cycle is finally closing, does another layer appear, another bill, another test you didn't ask for? And the strangest thing is that Taurus doesn't complain about this to just anyone. They absorb it, process it, move on. Sometimes it seems like there's a silent pact that Taurus makes with themselves very early on, to carry it without making a sound. And this confuses everyone around them, because from the outside, it seems like everything is fine, that the person is okay, that the sign is resilient by nature. But inside, the story is much more complex, and the question that remains is another one. Is there something happening here that goes beyond mere force? Is there a reason for this pattern that isn't simply, you were born this way? Because if there is, and there is, then understanding that reason changes everything. It doesn't remove the burden, but it completely changes what that burden means. And that's exactly where this conversation starts to get interesting. Think about it for a moment. A concrete bridge can withstand more weight than a wooden one, not because the concrete one suffers more, but because it was built with a material that has a different structural capacity, a density that allows it to distribute weight without collapsing. When you look at a bridge like that, you don't think, what a pity about that bridge. You think, what a structure. The issue isn't the suffering, it's the material. And Taurus, in energetic and archetypal terms, is one of the densest and most capable materials in the zodiac. Not the most spectacular, not the fastest, but perhaps the most capable of transforming pressure into permanent structure. And here's the part that changes everything. Taurus's trials don't arrive despite this structure, they arrive because of it. Not as punishment, as a process. There's a logic in what seems illogical, a method in what seems like chaos, an architecture in what seems like just accumulated pain. Each difficult cycle that Taurus goes through doesn't pass by empty-handed. It becomes solid ground beneath their feet. It becomes a foundation. It becomes something that didn't exist before and that now sustains everything that comes after. But there's a point within every great trial where understanding hasn't yet arrived, but the weight is already fully in place. And it's precisely in that interval, in that space between what's happening and what doesn't yet make sense, that Taurus becomes most vulnerable, not to visible collapse, which rarely happens, but to the deepest doubt. To that silent voice that questions whether everything they carry is proportional to what you truly deserve it. Whether what you're experiencing is commensurate with your strength, or if there's something you haven't yet found an adequate explanation for. It was while searching for answers to this that I found this digital book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose. It's not a book about easy consolation. It's a tool for those who are struggling and need to find the inner structure that sustains everything before the next cycle arrives. For Taurus specifically, it touches on something profound, the difference between the security you've built externally with effort and resilience over the years and the solidity that comes from within, which doesn't depend on any circumstance to remain stable. This distinction is what changes how Taurus navigates any trial. You are in exactly the right moment for this, not later, now, with the weight still active, with the question still open. It is precisely in this state that understanding goes deepest, when the mind is not distracted by calm, but completely present in the tension. This book was made for this specific moment. The link is in the first pinned comment. But be aware, this content may be taken down. Click now and download your copy. And for the comments, what was the trial that transformed you the most so far? Not the easiest one, the one that demanded the most from you. Write it below. What becomes a silent question is, in fact, the beginning of understanding. Because Taurus only asks this question when they've already carried enough weight to know that something more is happening. And that's exactly where the story begins to change. He thinks about Taurus's memory for a moment. Not the effective memory, the one that holds faces and dates, but the structural memory, the one that records what survived and what didn't. Every time something difficult happened to Taurus and he remained standing, it didn't just remain as a memory, it remained as a layer, as sediment, as another concrete slab added to the foundation of who he is. And there's something disturbing and beautiful about that at the same time. Taurus doesn't emerge from his trials the same. He emerges denser, more real, more himself, but in a way that didn't yet have a name before that specific cycle. The problem is that this process has a cost that no one talks about. Taurus accumulates carefully, almost architecturally, almost involuntarily. Each processed wound becomes a layer. Each loss endured becomes a foundation. But carrying this consistency, without complaining, without letting it leak, creates something that from the outside seems solid, but inside can be an enormous, inescapable pressure. Like a tree that grew crooked because of the wind. It didn't grow wrong, it grew responding to what was present, and it is precisely this twist that makes it more resilient than trees that grew straight without ever having been tested. But there comes a point where the tree that grew crooked needs to stop and understand the shape it has taken, because if it continues growing without this awareness, you might start confusing twisting with direction. You might start thinking that weight is normal, that pressure is the standard, that carrying is simply what it does, without questioning whether it's what you need to do. And this is where Taurus encounters one of its most silent and common traps. The silence of Taurus, not the silence of someone who has nothing to say, the silence of someone who processes things internally because they learned at some point in life that the internal process is more reliable than anything that can be verbalized before it's ready. Taurus digests, ruminates in the most literal and powerful sense of the term, and that is intelligence. But there's a breaking point that few can see coming. Not even Taurus itself. Because the steam accumulates without announcement. The pressure grows without a clear signal. And when it finally needs to come out, it comes out in a way that surprises even the one who started the process. Here's the question few ask Taurus, and that Taurus rarely asks themselves. What happens when this inner weight encounters an external trial that doesn't ask permission to enter? When the inner cycle hasn't yet closed and the outer one has already begun? It's at this specific intersection that Taurus reveals something beyond strength, an ability to sustain multiple weights simultaneously that most people simply don't have the structure to do. But it comes at a cost. It always comes at a cost. And this is where the divine architecture of difficulty begins to become clearer, because Taurus's trials rarely arrive in isolation. They are rarely a single event that resolves, passes, and leaves room for recovery. They arrive in layers, in overlapping cycles, as if the universe knew exactly what Taurus's carrying capacity is, and calibrated each weight to use exactly that capacity. Not a bit less, almost never much more. Think of raw gold. You've probably heard that gold needs to be heated to reveal its luster, but what's rarely mentioned is what happens before. The gold must first be found mixed with stone, earth, and other minerals that appear as solid as it. The separation isn't smooth, it's not comfortable. It involves real heat, real pressure, and a process that from the outside looks like destruction, but inside is refinement. Gold doesn't become gold despite the fire. It reveals what it already was because of the fire. Taurus is that material. Trials are that fire. And here's the part that hurts before release. The fire doesn't know it's fire. It simply does what it does. And the gold in the middle of the process doesn't feel the refinement, it feels the heat. It's only afterward, when the process is over, that the quality of what remains becomes visible. It's only afterward that what seemed like just accumulated pain reveals what was being built in silence. But a question lingers in this process. If trials are refinement, if the burden is architecture, if God or the universe or the force that organizes this cosmos chose Taurus to carry what others could not, why does it hurt so much? Why does it seem like punishment instead of purpose? Why, in the hardest moments, does the feeling not become one of refinement, but of abandonment? This is the most honest question Taurus can ask, and the answer isn't simple. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. There's something called the paradox of strength, and Taurus lives within it in a way that few signs can understand from the inside. The paradox is this: the more you demonstrate the ability to carry, the less the people around you realize that you might need support, not out of malice, because of a mistaken interpretation of competence. When someone seems to be able to handle everything, the surrounding environment stops offering support, not because it has been withdrawn, but because the need has become invisible. And Taurus, who rarely asks for help, not out of pride in the common sense of the word, but out of an almost sacred feeling that this is his place, that abandoning the burden would be abandoning a responsibility that was assigned to him, ends up carrying not only what is his, but also what the people around him stopped carrying because they assumed he could handle it. Think of a lighthouse. A lighthouse exists to illuminate the path for others. It is fixed, permanent, reliable. Ships pass by, find their way, and continue on their way. The lighthouse is still there, but rarely does anyone ask what the lighthouse needs. Rarely does anyone stop to check if the internal structure is intact, if the light still has what it needs to keep shining. Because the lighthouse has apparently always been there, so the assumption is that it always will be. Taurus is that beacon for those around them, and Taurus's most silent trial isn't one of those that come from outside with noise and urgency. It's the structural solitude of being the one who sustains without being sustained, of being the safe harbor without ever having had a harbor of their own. And here's the twist that could change everything. What if Taurus's most difficult trial wasn't any external circumstance, but the inability to receive, to let themselves be helped, to allow someone to carry them along, to relinquish control over the weight that has, in a way, become part of their identity? This is a question that Taurus needs to sit with long enough to be honest with themselves, because the answer completely changes what comes next. The digital book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose, was created precisely for this specific knot that Taurus carries. Not to say that you need to stop being strong, but to show that there is a fundamental difference between the strength that sustains and the strength that isolates, between carrying because it is your purpose and carrying because you have learned that there is no other way. This distinction, which seems small written like this, is what separates a life of resistance from a life of true abundance. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. There is something that differentiates the trials of Taurus from the trials of other signs. Not the volume, although the volume is real, but the specificity. The trials of Taurus are rarely abstract. They come with an address, with a name, with a date, with a specific face, a specific situation, a context that makes the pain absolutely concrete and impossible to ignore or make vague enough to bear more easily. A betrayal isn't just a betrayal. It's that specific person, that specific context, that moment when Taurus opened something they rarely open and found something unexpected on the other side. A loss isn't just a loss, it's that particular loss with that particular weight, arriving at that specific moment when the previous accumulation was almost at its limit. And there is something paradoxically useful in this. What has form can be touched. What can be touched can be examined. What can be examined can be integrated. Abstract, vague, faceless, addressless pain. That is the most corrosive because it has no outline. The specific pain of Taurus, however heavy it may be, has the structure that allows it to eventually be understood and transformed. A scar you can touch isn't the same as a vague, shapeless pain. The scar is bothersome. Sometimes it hurts when the weather changes, but it also tells a story. It's also proof that something real happened, was traversed, and left a record that is permanent, but not destiny. It's part of the map. Taurus carries a map full of specific marks, and each specific mark is, at the same time, a wound that can still hurt and a coordinate of where he has been, of how far he has come, of how long he stood when he had sufficient reason not to. And after integration, when the weight has been lifted and understanding has finally arrived, what remains is something that didn't exist before. Not just resistance, not just the capacity to endure, but a different quality of presence, a density of being that people feel when they are near Taurus without being able to name what it is. It's the gold after the fire. It's the root that went deep because it needed to, and that now sustains much more than the tree alone. There is a perspective that needs to be clearly stated, because it changes Taurus's relationship with its own weight. In virtually all great spiritual traditions, there is a common understanding. Those who carry more have a greater capacity to transform what they carry into something that benefits not only themselves, but everything around them. The weight was not given as punishment. It was given as raw material. A root that goes deep into the earth isn't punishing itself. It's not proving anything to anyone. It goes deep because it's precisely that depth that will support the entire tree when the storm comes. And the storm does come, for all the trees. The difference is what's underneath when it arrives. God, or whatever you call the higher power that organizes this cosmos, didn't choose Taurus to suffer. He chose Taurus to alchemize, to take what is heavy and transform it into structure, to be the root that goes deep when others can't, to be what remains when what is fragile passes away. But alchemy demands awareness. The alchemist who doesn't understand the process merely works with fire without knowing what is being refined. And Taurus, who goes through trials without understanding what is being built, loses half of what he should gain, because he is left only with the weight, without the meaning that transforms weight into something of value. And then we come to what remains after the fire. A Taurus that has endured a real ordeal, not circumventing it, not outsourcing it, not numbing it with distraction, emerges different in quality. Not heavier, denser, more real, more whole in a way it didn't have before that specific journey. The test wasn't the destination, it was the process that led to it. Coal becomes diamond, not because the process was gentle, but because the material had the exact structure to withstand the exact pressure for the exact amount of time. Diamond is not an improved version of coal. It is what coal always potentially was, before encountering the conditions that revealed it. Taurus is that material, and the most difficult trials that life presented were not mistakes of fate. They were not senseless punishments. They were the specific conditions that the universe knew that specific material needed to reveal what was hidden inside. The pain was real, the burden was real, the losses were real. None of that will be erased by a different perspective, but what can change is what Taurus does with what's left. Whether what's left is just a scar or a foundation. Whether what remains is just a memory of hardship or accumulated wisdom on how to overcome what needs to be overcome. Because in the end, the question isn't why God gave Taurus the most difficult trials. The question that matters, the one that truly transforms, is what Taurus did with them, and what it will do with those yet to come. Because they will come. And Taurus, more than any other sign, has what it takes not only to survive them, but to emerge from them more whole than when it entered.